Comrades, any examination of the challenges for the left in Britain cannot begin simply with Britain. We have to understand we live in a world of economic crisis, of instability and of inspiring resistance. I'll start with a quotation from the magazine, the pro-capitalist magazine, The Economist, which wrote last week about the March of Protest. It's a skit on the March of Progress, you understand. And it says the following. It's talking about Egypt, Turkey, Brazil, and so on. It says, the protests have many different origins. Each angry demonstration is angry in its own way. Yet just as in 1848, 1968 and 1989, when people also found a collective voice, the demonstrators have much in common. And for politicians who want to peddle the same old stuff, the news is not good. How will this year of protest unfold? One dark conclusion is that democracy has become harder. That implies that the Eurozone summer will surely get hotter. At some point, European leaders must curb the chronic overspending on welfare and grapple with the Euro's institutional weakness. And be sure, unrest will follow. It's quite a good analysis, in truth. Not the bit about the need to curb welfare, by the way. But from their perspective, it's true. It's a dangerous world out there for the bourgeoisie. And what we have to understand is how the economic crisis underpins what's going on in Britain and globally. The International Monetary Fund last week downgraded its forecast for world economic growth. It was the fifth downward revision since the beginning of last year. 5 in 18 months, downwards. And it said there were 3 factors why the world economy wasn't able to grow in the way they'd expected. The first was that the emerging market economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, were in a deeper and worse recession than they had expected. In Europe, the situation was worse than they'd expected. And the growth in the United States economy was lower than anticipated. Now, you'll pick up that if you have lower growth than expected in the emerging economies, and Europe is worse than expected, and the United States is worse than expected, there's not much left for the world bourgeoisie to take confidence from. But of course it shows that there isn't going to be any general revival in the short term, and that instead there will be a renewed attempt to attack wages, social conditions, the jobs of ordinary people in order to force up profits. And here Britain is a template. British workers are experiencing the longest fall in real wages since the 1870s. No, the 1870s, not the 1920s, not the 1930s, the longest fall in real wages since the 1870s. Prices have been rising faster than wages since 2010, and that means people are thousands of pounds a year worse off. But in truth, the wage squeeze began long before that. Wages stagnated between 2003 and 2008, even when the economy was growing. And the share of national income paid out as wages in Britain has been falling not for 3 years, but for 3 decades. If wages had kept pace with the growth in the UK economy since 1980, the average worker would now be £7,000 a year better off. £140 a week for the average worker is how much they have stolen from you since 1980. That's the scale of what happened in the defeat of the miners, and more particularly the reaction of the trade union and Labour Party leaders to the defeat of the miners. At the other end of the scale, we know, it's important to remember this when you're contemplating what you might do if you had an extra £140 a week, the very richest are soaring ahead, absolutely soaring ahead. You'd have seen the figures. The richest 1,000, that's not the top 1%, that's the top 0.0003%, now are worth £449 billion, not million, billion pounds. Their wealth has increased, just the increase, since the start of the crisis by £190 billion. Don't ever believe there's no money in Britain. Don't ever believe there's no money to pay for health or for education or for social services. They have grasped nearly £200 billion extra, just the 1,000 since the start of the crisis. And even if there is a recovery in the economy, not much sign of that in Britain, a sclerotic recovery possibly, 0.5%, 0.75% perhaps, it will increase, in my view, this question of inequality. There's a study that looks at the first 2 years of the supposed recovery in the United States, which shows that the wealth of the top 7% rose by 30% during that period of the recovery. Everybody else, it fell by another 4%. So that even when the recovery came, the inequality deepened inside society. That's a drear picture of an economic crisis, of the rich soaring away and the rest of us facing deep austerity. But we also know that there is inspiring resistance. When 17 million people march in Egypt on the 30th of June, that is a world-changing event. It is of such a scale. Egypt is a population of around 85 million people. So it's the equivalent of 13 million people marching in Britain. Imagine that. Not just the great anti-war demo of 2 million people, but one perhaps twice that, and a march of 1 million and more in Birmingham and Manchester and Glasgow and Liverpool and Bristol, and more on top of that in every part of the country. That's what it would have meant. An extraordinary event. But also in Turkey and Brazil and Bulgaria and Indonesia and the continuing struggles in Greece and Portugal and the Spanish state. But each of those struggles has simultaneously raised political issues about how the struggle moves forward. We have heard over the last few days, and we will hear over the next 2 days, about the difficult political issues that are raised inside every one of those struggles. Raising the issues of political organisation, of parties, of leaders, of politics, not simply the spontaneous eruption that carries the working class to power, but of the necessity for political organisation and political parties. If we look at Britain, we can see a government which is weak, but which is getting away with murder, which is threatening privatisations like the Royal Mail greater than Thatcher ever dared dream of. That is attacking workers' wages. And in order to diffuse and to divide the opposition, turns to the most filthy scapegoating and the most disgusting racism. You will remember George Osborne, public school boy, fat cat salary, using the case of Mick Philpott and the tragic death of 6 children to claim that this was the result when people were on welfare. They burned their children. That's what he was saying. This is the result of benefit culture. They bring in the bedroom tax, which drives Stephanie Bottrell to suicide. And when that isn't enough, they think about how it's possible to split us on the basis of anti-immigrant rhetoric. I don't know if you've seen in The Guardian this morning the revelations about what they are preparing around cutting immigrants off from basic services like health and education. And the group that was set up to talk about this inside the government was called the Hostile Environment Working Group. The Hostile Environment Working Group. Open to capital, closed to workers. That's the mantra of this government, and used to whip up racism, to whip up division. It's interesting about the Liberal Democrats. They didn't object to the policy, but they objected to the name of the group. They demanded that it be called the Interministerial Group on Migrants' Access to Benefits and Services. Not the racism, not the proposals, but you can't call it that for goodness sake. That's too obvious. It reminds me of the apartheid regime in South Africa, the group that ran the death squads was called the Civil Cooperation Bureau. It didn't stop it being nasty. And these disgusting proposals, we should constantly remind ourselves of this, are only possible because of what the Liberal Democrats did in allowing the Tories to come to office. And that racism that they've engendered doesn't simply feed into disgusting government policies. It's also the reason why UKIP is able to grow on the basis of a broader racism pushed by all the traditional parties, yes, by the Tories, yes, by the Liberal Democrats, but also, disgracefully, by Ed Miliband and many leaders of the Labour Party. When Miliband said that the major error of the last Labour government was it was too soft on immigrants, it gave the cue to everybody who wants to blame immigrants for the crisis now to gain more credence. It is a collapse in the face of right-wing ideas. And if you want to know why the EDL had a hope of being able to revive after the murder of Lee Rigby, it was precisely because the ground has been prepared by the traditional parties for Islamophobia and racism to flourish in a renewed way. And it is fortunate that we have an organisation like Unite Against Fascism, which can prevent the resurgence of the English Defence League, and that also we have people in communities and workplaces who can fight back against those lies around immigration. I said it's fortunate, it's not an accident. Those things don't just happen automatically, they happen because we have a Socialist Workers' Party. They happen because we have a group of revolutionaries who understand the need to work with broader layers of people around the question of opposition to racism and fascism, and also militants and activists in the colleges, in the schools, in the workplaces, in the communities, who can connect with the people around them. Despite the Tories' efforts to divide us, you can feel the anger that exists inside society. You can feel it around the bedroom tax. You can feel it over the protests over the National Health Service. And one of the dates that we all have to take away from Marxism is the 29th of September demonstration in Manchester. Our chance, having pushed the trade union leaders from below to fight for a massive turnout on that demonstration, yes, around the National Health Service, but around every issue as well that can unite people fighting back against the Tories. Disabled activists, against those who are horrified by the racism of the Tories, those who are fighting back against the cuts in their local communities, workers struggling for their rights, bringing them to Manchester to fight. But the problem is that for the last 2 years, the general level of struggle has been much too low. Since the 30th of November 2011, pension strike was snuffed out by the actions of the trade union leaders, there has been far too low a level of struggle. Not no struggle, be clear about that. You can look at the Mid-Yorks health workers, the City Clean refuse workers in Brighton, the Equinox housing workers, 2 unofficial post strikes recently, the other local battles in the post office like Bridgewater, the series of strikes in the high street post offices, the colleges in Chesterfield and Lambeth and elsewhere that have been on strike. You can see the civil service workers at one day of national action and a series of departmental and regional strikes. You can see the enthusiastic response to the teachers' strike in the northwest of England. But the general level of resistance is too low, much too low, compared to the challenges facing workers in Britain. We have to answer why. We have to answer why that is. And I think the crucial question is the role of the trade union leaders and of the leaders of the Labour Party. Not that there is this tidal wave of pressure from below to sweep them away. I'm not arguing that. What I am arguing is that their failure to give a lead means that people don't then have the confidence to fight without them. That it's because they have argued against resistance in every workplace and coordinated resistance and although they've talked about it, have set their face against a general strike, that because of that, the resistance has lost the momentum which it had on the 30th of November, and instead the level of struggle has been far too low. And you can see that the trade union bureaucracy have missed opportunity after opportunity when our side should have been fighting back and instead have been failing to fight back. And that's deepened by the question of the Labour Party. The Labour Party is getting its betrayals in early. It's before it gets to office, telling you that it's not going to be very different. The agreement to stick to the Tories' spending limit is disastrous. It means the cuts will not simply not be reversed, but will continue under a Miliband government. The failure to even say clearly that they will repeal the bedroom tax demonstrates just how little difference is proposed. And now comes the attack upon the Unite Union in order to create a gulf between the Labour Party and organised working people. It's an extraordinary attack, really. Find the only people who give you money and tell them you don't like them. No rich people under Blair used to give money to the party. This was the Blair's idea. I don't really need the unions. There's lots of rich people who will give money to the Labour Party because I'm Tony Blair and they like me. And he was partly right about it. And for a while people did. Nobody does now. 85-90% of the money for the Labour Party comes from the trade unions. So let's tell them they're not welcome. It's a brilliant strategy. Brilliant strategy. Not surprisingly, the first person to say it was wonderful was the said Tony Blair, of course. War criminal congratulating Miliband for attacking the trade unions. Tremendous recipe for success. And almost as bad, actually, in its own way, was Len McCluskey's response of saying he was very comfortable with this. There he was, thorn in his bottom. I'm very comfortable with that. Thank you very much. But let's understand what's happening here. This is an attempt to declass the Labour Party. They may not get away with it, but what they're really saying is we don't want anything to do with the idea of organised working people having a political voice inside society. It's incredibly important. Incredibly important. It's a shake-up for all of us to think about what that could mean. I know that Bob Crow is making a speech today in Durham where he's saying that the unions need a new party and inviting other trade unions to join him in a new party. Let's see how far that goes. But nonetheless, this is an event which should make everyone think about what the Labour Party is really about. It's not the same as the Tory party, but be clear, what's going on here is a systematic assault upon the idea of Labour as, in some sense, a voice of organised working people and of people, working people inside society. I would argue that the combination of the trade union and Labour Party leaders has held back the resistance. There are other arguments. There is an argument that goes on that really the working class has had it. And to be honest, some people will say it here. I'm not saying necessarily in this room, maybe you will. But some people certainly do say on the left, really the working class has had it. It used to be all right when it was miners and steel workers, but now it's had it really. There's going to be no fight from those sorts of people. And I think it's nonsense. The argument about the working class has never been about the particular shape of the working class. It's about its social role in society. It's about its economic power and its collectivity. And that remains unchanged, despite the alteration of the particular components of the working class. The ability of the working class to turn off the tap of profit and the necessity of working collectively in order to use its power, this is the central reason why from 1848, when Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, when the working class was a tiny minority of the world's population, confined to parts of Britain and the area we now call Belgium, even then Marx argued it, and it's still true in 2014. Of course we need to analyse concretely how this power is used, but nonetheless, the biggest mistake that revolutionaries could make at this point is to dump the idea that the working class is central to the project of emancipation of humanity, that there is some way of going around the working class or of ignoring the working class or of relegating the working class behind other forces inside society. The other idea that's put forward, this comes from Zizek and so on, is that the wrong sort of workers have been on the picket line. The wrong sort of workers, the salariat, those guarding their privileges because they're public sector workers. You know, these well-off school meals women, there they are, those disgusting public sector workers, getting nearly £12,000 a year, some of them, you know, their deep privileges. Those teachers, there they are, lots of them out there, I imagine, jealously looking forward to their long holidays, followed by their fat pensions. There you are, not sure which class you're in at all, pampered by Gove, pampered by the Tories, because you're on their side, perhaps. Or those postal workers, there they are, laying in bed till 4 a.m, dragging themselves in to pick up their 35-kilogram sack, running around for 8 hours in a privileged manner, and then going home early in the afternoon, bastards. I mean, imagine doing that when you're 63 or still 64, by the way. Or perhaps the civil service worker, you know, on 10 or 12 or 14,000 pound a year. These people who not simply administer benefits to people in work, but then have to claim the benefits in work. So low is their pay, and 200,000 or more of them sacked since the Tories came to power. Let's be clear. Public sector workers, from the woman who works as a teaching assistant in your local primary, to the teacher, to the postal worker, to the civil service worker, are absolutely part of the working class and are central to the struggle that's taking place in Britain today. And it's not just in Britain, actually. Look across the world. What are the two most important strikes probably in America recently? Wisconsin and the Chicago teachers' strike. Look in Egypt. Lots of different formations, but actually the teachers, the transport workers, the workers in the factories that are owned by the military, these also are absolutely crucial parts of the struggle that's taking place. The earliest group to organise collectively in Egypt was the tax collectors, the equivalent of the bloody HMRC and the PCS in Britain. So don't have any views about that, and I hope we can put that stupid argument to bed. I want to say, though, that the combination of these things means that we have to address soberly how revolutionaries organise at this point. There are possibilities of change. We will need to continue the struggle, not simply around the question of strikes, but also around the questions of fighting fascism and racism. The nail bomb at the Tipton Mosque revealed yesterday would have been the front page of every newspaper had the target not been a mosque. Had the target been 10 Downing Street or Westminster Cathedral, it would have been headlines everywhere about terrorism and the need for a mass crackdown across Britain. But because it's a mosque, it's relegated to the inside pages, if at all. Now, we have to regard those sorts of questions as important. We also need to think about how, in order to defeat us, and this is not just a British question, the level of repression is turned up in every society. What an extraordinary series of revelations came from Edward Snowden. That's why he's being hunted across the globe. I mean, the amazing thing about the Snowden revelations is that all the attention is about hunting the man who revealed these crimes, not about the crimes themselves. It's extraordinary that they get away with the fact that they listen, or potentially listen, to our phone calls, to our emails, to our text messages. All of us. They have their eyes on all of us. And they whip up the local, state, international cooperation in order to repress and take away our democratic rights. This too is an important area. Thank you. But the most important bit is the organisation of working class struggle. Here there's some potential that we need to look at. I've mentioned the 29th of September demonstration. I want to talk as well about the potential for struggle. There will be more teachers' strikes across the autumn. There will be a national teachers' strike in November. I hope that that strike will take place. It will require pressure from below on the teachers' unions leaders to make sure it does. And if it does, that it will become again a focus for resistance. Except this time, we can't let it be just 30th of November 2013 like November 2011. This time we have to hurl ourselves, just as we did last time, but we were too weak to do it, into creating the networks of people who can put the pressure on trade union leaders when they want to betray, and to try and push for independent initiatives where possible. It's not just those unions that should be fighting. The government has decided to privatise the Royal Mail. As I said, Thatcher even ran away from that. I mean, for her own reasons. I mean, allegedly she said she didn't want the Queen's head privatised. I would like the Queen's head removed, personally, but... and not just from stamps. But be clear, it's a big gamble for the Tories. It's quite a big gamble. I noticed that Francis Maud said in the Financial Times recently, "I don't lie awake at night worrying about the trade unions." Arrogant little person. But it's a big gamble, actually, because there's a poll taken immediately after the plans for privatisation were announced, which showed that 78% of the population were against the privatisation of the Royal Mail. Now, I know sometimes trade union leaders say, we're not quite sure whether the public support us on this. 78%, including more Tories being against it than for it, by the way, is not bad. It's not bad a basis. What about the workers? Are the workers up for it, perhaps? Not quite sure about whether they'd be prepared to fight. Well, they had a consultative ballot amongst the workforce recently. What was the result? A 74% turnout, not bad. Not bad, 74%, and 96% against privatisation. Now, if we can't get a struggle against the privatisation of Royal Mail, with 78% of the public on board even before you begin the campaign, and 90% or more of the workforce saying they're against it on a 74% turnout, then really we are in trouble. And the only way it won't happen is if somehow the leadership of the CWU doesn't come under enough pressure to call that sort of strike and make it a major rallying point for every woman and man across Britain to be part of the campaign to defeat them over the privatisation of Royal Mail. That is a real opportunity for trade unionists, not just in the Post, but across Britain, to fight for a struggle that could turn them back. But it's because of the fact that we can't rely on the trade union leaders that we were one of the forces that launched the Unite the Resistance initiative, to bring together those people who want to fight, but more than that, are frustrated by the trade union and Labour Party leaders, to discuss and organise, to debate how to put pressure on the people at the top, but also to create networks at the bottom, to work with those left trade union leaders who are prepared to lead the fight, but also to create the pools of activists who are capable of organising separately against austerity and against the Tories. And you know there's an audience for it. Some of you will have seen Jerry Hicks at the opening rally. 80,000 votes, 36% of the vote against McCluskey. McCluskey perhaps the most left-wing in terms of the big trade union leaders. Nonetheless, 80,000 people vote for the left of him. At every trade union conference this year, a real audience for people who want to go further than the trade union leaders are prepared to lead. In workplace after workplace, people who say, I want to see a fight, but actually the people at the top of our union aren't leading it. That's what Unite the Resistance is about, bringing those people together. But it's not the only game in town. We also recognise that the People's Assembly was an important initiative which we have taken part in at the regional and at the national level, which we will continue to argue for our distinctive politics inside it. We will be part of it, but we will also argue that there are issues that will emerge with the trade union leaders, with the Labour Party, and that we can't have our struggle subordinated simply to keeping those sorts of people on the platform and on board. It's too important to be left simply to the trade union and Labour Party leaders, because their record and what they say about themselves tells us about where they're likely to lead the movement. I'll finish in the last 5 minutes with this. I spoke earlier how about every struggle, because we exist in a world of global crisis, of instability, of turmoil, and the potential for big changes in society, that because of that, huge political issues are thrown up all the time. At every period in history, under the capitalist system, socialists have argued for organisation, for revolutionary movements and political parties to give leadership to them. Today is a time of enhanced importance of that argument. This is not a time for more splits on the left, for weaker political leadership, for a socialist workers' party that is not capable of rising to the challenges in front of us. And I'm not trying to gloss over questions. There will be, amongst revolutionaries, serious discussion and debate about how we move forward and the best way to address the challenges in front of us. But all of those have to be based upon a belief in the necessity for a united revolutionary force which is capable of working coherently and in cooperation with one another to fight for revolutionary socialism in Britain in 2014 and to give leadership to the struggles that emerge. That is an irreducible necessity. Anything that diverts from that, anything that runs away from that, is failing to grasp with the real struggle in front of us. We have very big challenges in front of us as a class and as revolutionaries in Britain today. And I think we have to be sober about it, to recognise the damage that's been done to the movement by the trade union leaders and the Labour Party leaders, but also recognise that around issues like the bedroom tax, around questions like the fight against racism and fascism, around the potential for strikes in the autumn, and the fact that whatever happens, we will connect with wider audiences of people who want to fight for them, there are massive opportunities. This is the agenda that the Socialist Workers' Party faces, and I think it's the agenda which the working class in Britain also is challenged by. That we are going to have to be involved in the fight of our lives to prevent them steamrolling our jobs, our living conditions, and our homes and our services. Unless we win that fight, they are going to inflict massive damage upon the working class. But if we can throw them back, we can not only drive out the Tories, we can begin to raise the arguments about a different world, a different system, and a fighting against capitalism. Thank you.
Comrades, I want to start from the recovery from the sellout on November the 30th, which I was part of in terms of strike action across the public sector. It knocked us back. However, in Sheffield, in the last 3 months, I just want to really reiterate what we've been able to achieve and confirms what Charlie is saying about the current period. Firstly, Unite the Resistance, we had the biggest conference ever of 220 trade unionists that were brought together where the party was at the core. not only were we able to do that, when it came to the fight against the EDL, we not only mobilised with other people outside of us, including those inside of the Labour Party around Unite Against Fascism. 1 week 700 against the EDL, then 2,500 against the EDL, and then the following week, people should know, the British movement turned up on the street. One comrade from the paper stall then challenged them, and then 80 or 90 ordinary shoppers joined in to chase the British movement off the street. But that was part of the atmosphere we created by Unite Against Fascism. The bedroom tax. We threw ourselves into the bedroom tax. It is true that our comrades are central in a state after a state where we haven't been for 30 years and joined together with working class activists in order to try and organise and throw back the bedroom tax. Lastly, the People's Assembly. Not only did we mobilise coaches to come down to London for the national conference, last Tuesday we had 75 or 80 at an organising meeting. We had to move rooms because the turnout was so big. But what's important was, again, our comrades inside the NUT were central to that in terms of the discussion that came out of it, a common discussion where everyone decided it was necessary to work together to push back on austerity. It meant the 29th of September became the real focus for those involved in the Sheffield People's Assembly. And not only that, people should know already trade unions in Sheffield have got transport arranged and organised, and it means the trade union bureaucracy officials are serious about mobilising for the 29th. If they're serious about that, we have to go with them in order to get thousands upon thousands on the streets in Manchester. And after that, if it turns out that the FBU national ballot turns into action, or the teachers begin to fight, or other unions like the postal workers, then other things become possible. Therefore, the conclusion is we mobilise with people, we then begin to argue the politics about what the left should be doing to really carry a political argument, and we begin to organise amongst those that have had enough, has started to overcome from the November the 30th sellout, that want to unite together in order to carry through a successful fight against austerity and the EDL.
Comrades, it doesn't take a genius to see that Gove's attack on teachers is relentless. Every single day when the Radio 4 comes on, yesterday it was school meals, the day before, and so on and so on. But I think we have to remember when Gove says that teachers really shouldn't have a lunch break anymore. Most teachers don't have a lunch break, to be honest. They shouldn't have a lunch break anymore. What he's actually saying is so lunchtime supervisors should be sacked. That's what he's saying. When he's saying that teachers should do this, this and this, what he's also saying is teaching assistants should be sacked. So in fact, Gove's attack on teachers is actually an attack on every single worker in every single school. And that's what we have to remember. You see, I was delighted yesterday to receive the email that said, we're out for action, and we're out for action at the week of the Tory Party conference. And I'm thinking, actually, Manchester's not that far away. Maybe we could get teachers to go over to Manchester. But I don't think it's just about teachers. If we can close down as many schools as possible, we can take the lunchtime supervisors, we can take the teaching assistants, and to be honest, we can take the kids as well. And I think that's the way we need to look at it. But, and there is a but, we cannot be complacent. We have been marched to the top of the hill, and marched down again on a number of occasions. I mean, desperate times when you have to raise money for cupcakes and teddy bears. To be honest, it's good, but it's not really where I want to be. A house full of bloody toys. So therefore, it's got to be, and actually that's down to every single person in this room to conduct that argument. Why this strike beginning on the 30th of September are so important, because it's actually about everybody. It's about our kids, it's about our future, but it's also about our class, because if the teachers lose their lunch break, my God, the rest of you are going to get it as well. And it is a fundamental attack on teachers right now. I have a cunning plan. Because I need a cunning plan, you always need a cunning plan. And my cunning plan at the moment is to say, to get the confidence back for the teachers to strike, they need the confidence of the class. And actually one of the ways of doing that is to make sure the teachers know that the parents, the lunchtime supervisors, etc., are all on board. So we're planning a meeting at a local primary school. And the local primary school is it's been chosen because it's next door to Mid-Yorks Hospital, where the women who were on strike recently, where we gave a tremendous amount of support for, a lot of whom are mums, or even grandmums, and certainly aunts and uncles. And we are going to get them down to help us get the confidence back to the teachers to make sure the 30th of September is a bloody good fight and that we don't have to keep resorting to teddy bears. Because I tell you, I've got a message for Christine Blow. By the way, we sent teddy bears to our twin school, and it doesn't matter. They went on picket lines and things, but they were very good. And they start coming back. We've also said about teddy bears, if Christine Blower and Christine Keats sell us out on this one, they're going to get the teddy bears, but they're going to get them all ripped to pieces and all in shreds. And that's what I'm encouraging.
I wanted to start, is that on? Sorry, I wanted to start with, I think, the most important part where Charlie left off, which is, what do we do since November 30th? So I think the explanation for the November 30th strikes and how they were sold out, we need to go a little bit deeper. It's true the trade union leaders turned off the tap, but as revolutionaries, we need to ask, how did they manage to do that so easily? And what could we do next time to make it more difficult? And I think part of that is analysing the period that we're in, and recognising the impact of neoliberalism over the last 30 years has had a damaging impact on the level of working class organisation, both in the workplace and outside of it, which means that the degree of collective consciousness which could be a counterweight to the bureaucracy doesn't exist in the same sense or the same strength as it has done in previous periods. And then the question for us then is, how do we move that forward? How do we start to build a degree of political organisation in the workplace that can create a counterweight? It's not simply by agitating around economic issues. It needs to be looking towards what are the possibilities that exist today. And something that I don't think was drawn out enough is that there's opportunities as well as weaknesses in the current period. The growth of left reformism in the shape of Owen Jones and Unite is both a threat in some ways, but also an opportunity. The fact that people don't necessarily have the competence to fight industrially, but do hate what the Tories stand for, gives people a degree of political confidence and a willingness to fight. And I think you saw that expressed in November 30th. While the strikes were called from above, there was actually a dynamic within it where people, when they were given a lead, took onto the streets and fought. And I think that we're underplaying a little bit the question of the People's Assembly, because I think what it did represent, and it's a fragile coalition fraught with difficulties, is a coming together of the trade union leaders on a grounds where they are prepared to fight, significant sections of left reformism, and the possibility they had of drawing together vast numbers of people. I think the local meetings around the country point a picture to where could we find an audience to argue for revolutionary strategy to rebuilding the workplace. Our meeting in Brixton was almost 100 people strong, biggest organising meeting in years, and what was the strength of it was that we were able to use that platform at the top to give a sense of participation and democracy from below, where actually the openness of that process at the moment is something that we need to seize an opportunity to be a part of and work through. We need to build the strikes, build the demonstration, build the strikes, but we need to try and do that with a wider audience of people and learn the lessons alongside them by fraternal dialogue. The question of rebuilding in the workplace is something that the SWP or a limited set of allies within Unite the Resistance is too narrow to do. We need a much broader audience of people where we're constantly taking a strategy and an analysis of the current period which sees that we can use the political confidence that exists to build united campaigns with left reformists where we can and develop an argument of socialism from below in practice. What does that mean? It means taking the politics into the workplace, taking people from your workplace to the People's Assembly, taking people onto the UAF demonstrations and having an argument within about how do we do some of the best lessons people did around... Ray Morrell is an example that I was heard before. How did we build workplace organisation in the arms industry? Actually, he started by building an anti-war group, and he then translated those people, into a group of people prepared to fight and build a Unite branch. The possibilities of doing that are much greater now. The fact that this is a political generalisation against austerity, the fact people have learnt the lessons from the capitalist crisis of 2008, that people are questioning huge elements of the system and the establishment, means that we can have a degree of confidence in our ideas within this framework. And I think that we need to stop trying to work through things like Unite the Resistance. I think the conference agenda that's put forward is quite good, but actually we need to look at the much broader possibilities that exist for revolutionaries today.
Jim Fagan will be followed by Michael Bradley.
Jim Fagan, Walthamstow SWP. On September 1st, I was really proud to be outside the Bell Pub on Forest Road with thousands of other local people, Asian, white, East European, men, women and children of all ages, who blocked the EDL and stop them reaching their route. I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, the SWP, in a sense, it's a vindication of the policy we've been pursuing for 30 years, yeah? But also is a result of our intervention in the local campaign, where week after week, actually, our comrades had to caucus to intervene, to argue, yes, we do want Stella Creasy, the Labour MP, on the platform, even though the Labour Party are making cuts. Bans are not the answer. We need to create enough people that we can actually physically oppose the EDL. And the point is, we had to keep winning and re-winning this argument with people, where we had to win the majority of people to back us, which we did. And as a result of that, actually, one of these members, the best people now that were involved in that campaign, have joined the SWP, or they're here as contacts. Now, what I have to be saying, quite honestly, comrades, that's just a mild example of the kind of complicated situations we're going to face now and in the future. But what worries me is actually, since January, I won't know sometimes, actually, if a comrade really disagrees with me, because it won't be raised in a branch meeting, it won't be raised in the caucus, but it'll be on a public blog. Yeah? Now, if you look at Walthamstow, if you look at the struggles we're facing, they're not games in which we're trying to score points. Comrades may be right, they often will be right, but bloody argue with me. Don't go to somewhere else, because, as I said, as long-term member of the SWP, it's the first time I've experienced, actually, I'm working with people outside the party that trust me and I trust them. And I've really got a big feeling about lack of trust in each other inside the party. We can't afford it. It's not bringing us anywhere. It's not bringing the movement forward. It's got to stop.
Michael Bradley will be followed by Jenny Sutton.
See, why the debates that we're involved in over this weekend are so crucial is because of the scale of the attack. That's number one. Secondly, our job as revolutionary socialists is to try to give people a strategy to respond to this crisis, and that's why we have to try to win an argument about agency. What is the real social force that is capable in this situation of driving back the onslaught? And that is the working class. Right, so about it, and we have to then think, what does that mean in reality? First of all, it means an explanation in some ways of what happened around the 30th of November. Did the strike drop from the sky? No. There was an explosion of anger amongst the students. There were mass demonstrations around the TUC. There was a hot summer of riots and the rest of it. And within that, you had socialists working inside key unions alongside some officials who were prepared to move, who built up a momentum up into that strike. The sellout wasn't simply a precipice. There were 6 months of rearguard action when teachers and lecturers struck inside the schools and colleges in London, when there was strike by health workers and by civil servants and by lecturers in May, and there's been an ongoing battle for the last 18 months inside the teaching unions to get the thing back on track. We have to understand that, because otherwise we believe these things blip on because of the wishes of a trade union official and are turned off simply afterwards, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is our job then in the situation is, how do we develop that layer who are able to act with the officials when they rightly represent us, but also to a level of independence when they don't? And I think we have to use a number of forums to do that. People have talked about the assemblies. One little secret about the assemblies, I've on Twitter at one stage somebody said, who's organised this bloody event? Is it the fucking SWP? Because they seem to have so many speakers. And that was a sign of how seriously we took that event and how seriously we've taken the local mobilisations and the rest of it. But within that, there is a harder minority. There are a harder minority. The 80,000 who voted for Jerry Hicks, the 40% of the conferences, at every conference, who have tried to go up against the top table and the rest of it. And we also need to pull those people around us and also pull some socialists around it as well. When we talk about the structural changes inside the class, there are developing structural changes, and we need to think about how to respond, but also how do we build organisation in those places? Struggle. Look at what happened around the electricians dispute and the possibility now of unionising the entirety of Crossrail. If anybody heard the young woman speaking from the Bafawa union about the unionisation of Greggs, you know that actually when you talk about precarious workers, they can become the centre part of the working class in the same way that dockers, car workers and other workers we were told were unorganisable in the past weren't. And it's our job as socialists to give these people a strategy. The last thing of all, really, is then what does it mean over the next few weeks? It means us being at the absolute epicentre of pulling 100,000 people or so onto the streets of Manchester on the 29th of September. That is your test as a revolutionary socialist in the next few weeks. Who are you bringing? How are you mobilising? How are you starting to set the atmosphere so when the strikes develop in the autumn around the teachers and the rest of it, there are sparks that are being struck over tinder? We have to analyse our situation, but we also be at the centre of driving that through. And lastly, we have to fight to pull the minority around us. This is not a passive question. We have to reach out through Socialist Worker, through networks around UTR, through the assemblies and the rest of it, but we have to be in the middle of that virtuous circle. Socialists in the middle, mobilising the bigger cog that mobilises the class to beat the bloody Tory.
Jenny will be followed by Sarah MacDonald.
God, I hate following Michael Bradley. Jenny Sutton, I'm Bronze Secretary of the UCU at Cornell College in Tottenham. I just wanted to address this issue that Charlie referred to about this idea that teachers have somehow become a kind of privileged layer of the working class, because I'm in further education, and at the moment the casualisation rate stands at about 60%, and more of our staff are temporary or casual workers earning less than the London living wage. And what we're really seeing in my sector and across the public sector is the proletarianisation of workers in this sector. And it's not just about pay, it's about the reduction in our autonomy, any professional integrity and a professional judgment is all being eroded, and alienation is increasing at a rate that is driving many people out of the sector. What I wanted to say is that this is really nothing new. On the one hand, it's a reversion of capitalism to type. I mean, what we're seeing is the end of the post-war social democratic consensus, and we are going back in a way to the 30s, where workers would queue up in the mornings for dock labour. But I think those dockers in the 1930s would never have believed that in 2013 it would be teachers and public sector workers who are facing the same degree of casualisation. And I think what that shows us really is that although at the moment the issue of reformism is quite beguiling, I mean, people want to believe, some people want to believe that we can have a reformist Labour government that can pull us out of the worst aspects of what the Tories are offering. But I think the reality is that it's becoming more and more apparent to people that actually capitalism can't deliver, reformism is limited, and we do need revolutionary change. But I think what's also apparent is that argument that might well have seemed a minority or an extreme argument 10 years ago, actually when you talk to people now about a general strike, you talk to people about the need for fundamental change, actually they're in agreement. And what's not lacking is the spirit. Every time we've called a strike in the UCU, we've had no problem in getting the most low paid, the most casual workers, the most vulnerable workers out because they want to be fighting. And the key thing that's lacking, and I want to echo what Charlie has said, is that confidence that comes from leadership from the front. And I think the question that we face now is we have to be there as revolutionary socialists. We have to be there to build that revolutionary alternative. We cannot give up that ground to reformism. We cannot allow those beguiling messages to hold sway. And yes, we've got to work with all those, the People's Assembly, Left Unity, all those new forces that are emerging, but we have to be absolutely clear that the position that we argue for is that we need a fundamental revolutionary change in society to meet the needs of the working class. And the choice we face is socialism or barbarism. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah will be followed by Sue Caldwell.
Hi, I'm Sarah MacDonald from the Weekly Worker. Charlie made the point that resistance in the period is too low, and he's right. And then that begs the question, what then is needed? Well, comrades, I think what's needed is a party, but then that asks the question, what kind of party do we need? Do we need another left unity project of the sort of Labour Party Mark II, left reformist projects like Socialist Alliance, like Respect? Do we need a party or a movement like the People's Assembly or a Left Unity Project now that's sort of amorphous and broad? Or do we need a revolutionary party? And I would say that we need a revolutionary party. But that revolutionary party should not be, needs to be a democratic party. And the idea that a revolutionary party in the tradition of Leninism and democratic centralism should actually have both democracy and centralism, and not to quote somebody recently said, democracy for 3 months and centralism from 9. A revolutionary party needs to actually be honest with itself and with the working class. A revolutionary party shouldn't suppress dissent, but should be open and forthright in criticism. A centralist organisation should have its members fight for the right course of action, and yes, have unity in that period of action, absolutely. But it must have the right for a minority to become a majority through argument, through debate, and through discussion. That doesn't stop people, it doesn't hinder the fight, it doesn't stop people going out and fighting against fascism or racism. It doesn't stop people going out and fighting against the bedroom tax. What it does is actually make people better cadre, better class fighters, better educated, better at having these arguments and discussions in its own ranks, in its own papers, in amongst the class itself. Because we can't treat the working class like children, we have to have these open debates and discussions in front of the class. Thank you.
Okay, after Sue, we'll have Karen Reisman, and apologies to the other people who put slips in.
See, we do have to have an honest debate. We have to have an honest debate about what happened and why strikes are called off and so on. You see, when Rob says it's simply a matter of the effect of neoliberalism on class consciousness, I don't think that's satisfactory, because especially you look at the public sector workers, and that strike represented some of the best organised workers who are actually least affected in terms of their workplace organisation by the moves towards precarious working that Rob talked about. And actually, why were they called off was because of the role of trade union bureaucracy as a layer that seeks to intervene in between the bosses and the workers, and therefore vacillates and therefore needs to be pushed from below by a rank and file workers' organisation. And that workers' organisation is low because of the largely because of the low level of struggle, and therefore the responsibility of trade unionists and socialists who want to rebuild the rank and file is not to sit back and say the public sector strikes are not important, that's not where it is, we've got to talk about general politics. It's actually to take every single little bit of struggle that you possibly can and flame it to the biggest possible level that it can be, and use that to rebuild organisation. When the teachers in the Northwest were on strike, I work in a school in London. I didn't go, some poxy little strike up north, I'm in London. Actually, what we did, we organised, we had a solidarity picket in the morning, which had teachers, cleaners, canteen workers, teaching assistants, took a photo, sent it up to our twin school in the Northwest. We arranged a leaflet all day outside the town hall about why we support the strike and why we're going to be on strike in August. Not only was our school doing it, we got two new young reps from local primary schools to bring delegations along to join us. People from local council workplace came down, from a local housing charity. Among the people who signed the petition were people from the local civil service workplace who'd been on strike just recently. And actually you begin to see how an organisation like United Resistance in a local area could pull all of those people together, rebuild organisation by supporting each other's struggles, and get together and say, how can we build a massive demonstration on September the 29th? And that actually is what the party is going to be trying to do. And it's very important that every single socialist in this room is part of that campaign to make that a mass demonstration. We need to be united together, and everybody needs to make a clear commitment that we're going to do that. Do we need to have political debate in that process? Yes, we do. And I'll tell you what I don't want to be doing. I don't want to be getting up in the morning, cooking the breakfast, going to work, coming home, cooking a dinner, going to my branch meeting, having a really good political argument, hopefully, going home, it's now 10:30, and I've got to spend 2 hours on a bloody blog reading people who don't actually fundamentally agree that we should be building a massive demonstration with United Resistance on September the 29th. And the kind of party that has to be central to that is a party that is rooted in an understanding that we have to be part of every single political debate going, but we have to argue like mad for the centrality of the working class within those campaigns, and argue for a transformation of society, a revolutionary party, selling a revolutionary newspaper alongside people we don't agree with, but acting independently of them where necessary.
Karen Reisman from Manchester. I'm a health worker, and when we went out on strike on November the 30th, the vast majority of those health workers who went out on strike had never ever been out on strike before. Most of the stewards and branch secretaries who organised those people to come out on strike didn't really have any belief that they were going to come out on strike, even a few weeks before the strike actually happened. I think that the fact of a strike, the fact that you do it, makes 10 million arguments that you can have winnable compared to the arguments that you have in the abstract. And I think we have a difficulty at the moment where the impact of that strike being sold out, right, is having an impact on people's heads, but the fact that it happened is still there, and we have to return to the possibility. Because I do think when we went to Unison Conference and the union leadership are saying to us essentially in one sense, let's just wait for Labour, let's just, if we get a Labour government, what sort of Labour government will we have? That's their strategy, and their strategy is not credible to branch secretaries, trade unionists and members who are feeling overwhelmed on a day-by-day basis with the scale of what's being thrown at them. But they're not 100% convinced about what we're arguing either. But I think what is true is those people are much more interested in talking to us because they haven't got a plan as to what to do. They aren't. And I think that's a real opportunity we have at the moment. But we have to use both that opportunity to talk to people, to build, to work with them, to work through what sort of strategy, but we also have to create some more facts on the ground. And the fact that the trade union leaders have been pushed into, for whatever reason, and there are all sorts of reasons why Dave Prentice is backing the demonstration on September the 29th, but in some ways that's not relevant. What's particularly relevant is the fact that he is, and that creates massive opportunities. We have an opportunity to make that big, and when that is big, which we have a responsibility to organise the people who do that, then it recreates the facts on the ground which show that there is a possibility in Britain to organise at the moment, so that the Egypts, the Greeces, the Brazils that people look at with envy but think can't happen here, can happen here. And I think we have to take our priority as organising that. I feel frustrated with having to do and read and organise and meet about things that don't appear to be taking me particularly forward. I want to be meeting and talking to people about what we're doing to build the 29th, who we're working with and how we can get that there, because I want to change the heads of the branch secretaries and the stewards that we work with. When they threatened 500 redundancy in a branch I briefly worked in when my department was reorganised in and out of it, we did manage to get some mass meetings, but then they moved me out of that branch and it was hard to hold on to the sense of fighting. But there is real potential, and I think we have to work with those people who want the potential, and I think the evidence is true. You look at the Jerry Hicks vote, you look at the fact that we were re-elected in Unison despite all the shit that's gone on, the fact that we recruited 8 people at Unison, had bigger meetings than we've ever had before. There are possibilities. Don't waste these possibilities, because we have far too much to lose and far too much to gain by not.
Thanks to everyone who spoke. I want to answer Manuel's question about whether we should break away from the unions, and the short answer to that is no. What would be Dave Prentice's dream? It would that the SWP and those who agree with it leave Unison and go off and form some tiny public sector workers' union. What a wonderful life he would then have. So easy. What would be McCluskey's dream? That the 80,000 who'd voted for Jerry Hicks get together and a goodly proportion of them go off into the sunset, leaving him to run the union exactly as he wants. So we have to be clear that this would be a strategy to let the big trade union leaders off the hook and to make those who have seen through the trade union leaders' betrayals incapable of having an audience with those around them. So it's not a strategy that's ever worked in Britain, and it's not one that we're going to follow. Instead, we're going to think about what rank and fileism means in 2014 in Britain. It's not like 1970. We do not have a confident layer of shop stewards in every workplace who are capable of leading independent struggle from the bureaucracy. We don't have it. Can't wish it into existence, can't pretend it exists. But what we do have to do is try and recreate those networks of activists who can play that role. And in order to do that, this is where I disagree with what Rob Owen said, it's not enough to propagandise. It's not enough just to go to meetings and say that we need to have more struggle against the bureaucracy, or we need to revive the trade union movement, or we need to have an independent layer. You have to organise it. You have to find a forum to bring those people together. And it can't just be the Socialist Workers' Party. I wish that everybody who agreed with those sorts of ideas joined the Socialist Workers' Party. It's not true, though. A possibility exists not just to have the big meetings like the People's Assembly, which are very important, but to find within that groups of people who want to organise in a way which the People's Assembly doesn't offer to them. And then to use that to raise the level of resistance in your local area, to take independent initiatives, whether it be about unionisation or solidarity or support for other groups of workers, and to then put the pressure inside the working class that can move other groups of people. And I believe in the run-up to the 30th of November, on a small scale, we managed to find ways to do that. But we need it on a much broader scale than that. Unite the Resistance offers at least the possibility of reaching out to wider groups of people to do that. I'll also say that we need to think about what form of organisation we need inside the bedroom tax campaign. You see, there are various forms of collectivity inside the working class. The highest form of collectivity inside the working class is the strike, is workers' action, is the organised trade unions where they're strongest, turning off the tap of profit. But it's also important to recognise the collectivity of working class people in their communities is important. That's why we took the decision to put centre stage the bedroom tax campaign, to recognise it as an important area to organise around, simply because if we could defeat them over this issue, if we could get a mass movement against the evictions, against the attempt to take people away from their homes, against the attacks on benefits, this would flow over into giving people confidence to fight many more of the attacks that the Tories are putting forward. We need more victories. And in the bedroom tax, we have the potential at least to throw back the Tory attack on one particular area of the welfare state. And even if you're not directly affected by it, you can be outraged by it. And you can be part of the movement which says we're going to fight, we're going to see off the bailiffs, we're going to stop the evictions, we're going to demand that the councils give a pledge of not throwing anyone out of their homes, and that we demand that the Labour Party says that they will repeal it. This is the sort of campaign which, as well as the struggle in the workplace, is absolutely critical for us. As for the criticism of the democracy of the SWP, well, look, we keep it very well hidden, but the truth is there's been quite a lot of argument inside the SWP over recent months. The one thing we're not short of is the opportunities, I believe, for democracy and debate. And that's a good thing, actually, to have debate and democracy inside the party. But at the same time, we need to stress the necessity of us moving forward together. And we are going to solve political questions inside the SWP by political argument. We're going to do it by carrying forward the democracy and the debate inside the party. But we also need to insist that in 2014 we can't have anything except a unified party that is capable at key moments of working alongside one another and moving forward. And we have to ensure that the SWP is not prevented from playing that role by its internal difficulties. That's the task that we have in front of us. In every struggle that emerges at the moment, there are going to be sharp political questions, And we need to have a stronger revolutionary organisation. We don't need more splits. We don't need more parties. We don't need breakaways from where we are in the SWP. We need a stronger SWP. And I would urge everyone who's not a member here today to think about joining the party, to be part of the battle against racism, the battle against fascism, fighting for a higher level of resistance in the workplaces, fighting against the bedroom tax, and fighting for a socialist future.